In this video, we shall look at two important topics. Both the topics are important from UPSC mains examination point of view, while the first topic can be incorporated under GS1 paper of social issues, and the second topic is covered under the polity, which comes under GS2 of the mains paper. Now let's look at the topics. Caste count. So this topic is related to in the context of the Tamil Nadu government has taken a decision to establish a commission. Now this commission was asked to collect the caste based data. Why this necessity has arrived? Because there has been a long standing demand or agitation from a community of Tamil Nadu, that is Vaniyar community, which is seeking 20% explicit reservation in education and jobs. So that reservation is only for that community, which goes for 20%. Now this kind of demand for exclusive reservation is not new in the independent India. Take the case of Gujars from Rajasthan, Jats from Haryana, Patidars from Gujarat, Kapus from Andhra Pradesh. Now all these are not only seeking for reservation, they are also most influential, politically influential communities which are seeking for reservation under backward caste. Now in our country, while reservation itself is a most debatable issue, on the other hand, this kind of demands for exclusive reservation, means each community seeking for certain fixed percentage of reservation, has become one more debatable issue. On the other hand, if you look at the Supreme Court's stand on this, before promoting any community with any particular reservation, Supreme Court has directed the governments to collect any quantifiable data. Quantifiable data is the one which will justify whether that particular community or caste really needs reservation or not. Okay, so justification of reservation shall be approved through only quantifiable data collection. For example, take the case of reservations in Tamil Nadu. In fact, in the famous Mandal case 1980, the Honorable Supreme Court has given a verdict that reservation in general should not go beyond 50%. If in any case it crosses 50%, it should be under an extraordinary situation, right? Now take the case of Tamil Nadu. The reservation given by Tamil Nadu is 69% today. So it should be ready to justify that amount of reservation, right? And we all know that reservation in our country is based on the social and educational backwardness of a particular community, right? Community in our country, community means I am referring to a caste. So if any caste comes under social and educational backwarded one, then it will be assigned with the reservation. But for that to confer a reservation, we need a quantifiable data. Okay, now the point is, the article says that it is technically, if not impossible, it is very difficult task to enumerate the social and educational backwardness of each and every community. Take the case of SC and ST. That's a simple task, because inherently these communities are socially, politically, economically, they are backwarded only. But the tricky nature of backward caste, OBC, is these communities, it is very difficult to differentiate the social and educational backwardness from the political backwardness. As I said earlier, the Gujars, Jats, Patidars and Kapus, though they are politically influential, they say that they are backwarded under social and educational category. In fact, the last caste-wise data census in India is conducted in 1931, that is in pre-independent India. And in post-independent India, in 2011, similar kind of caste census was conducted, that is the socio-economic caste census has been done. But however, the caste wise data was not revealed, not disclosed to the public. The reasons are, the first thing is lack of reliability on the way this data is collected. Number two, there is an element of political and electoral sensitivity included here. You know, the for instance, if any particular caste with a significantly large population found to be under backward caste, now the political parties would look upon that caste as a vote bank. That is what I mean by political and electoral sensitivity. Finally, having said all these things, data collection for the purpose of quantifiable data is very crucial for doing the social justice, which is nothing but the attaining the goal of casteless and equal society. Right? That's it about this topic. Hard bargains and the art of policy making. Now, this is about the discontent over the new formulas that were introduced by the central government very recently. Now, the issue is not about the merits of the new formulas. Totally, three laws have been introduced. One is regarding the essential commodities, the other is related to contracting, farm contracting, and the last one is related to farm trading, right? Or farmers trading, farmers trade. Now, this article essentially doesn't speak about the merits. Are these laws are farmer friendly? Are they corporate friendly? Now, it didn't make any comments upon this. The article's main emphasis is about, had the central government brought this issue, discussed this issue with the farmers before introduction of the bill itself, then today these kind of agitations, dharnas would not have been occurred. So as we discuss the topic, you will understand it more clearly. So the topic is farmers agitation and the role of parliament. It says that parliament is the best platform for deliberating, because parliament involves a consultative mechanism at multiple levels. Means, before, first of all, what is the primary role of a parliament? Primary role is to enable a law through discussions and deliberations. Now that kind of discussion will happen through consultative mechanism. So different stakeholders like farmers, farm experts, opposition parties, and state governments, all these kind of stakeholders should be consulted at the time of introduction of the bill, so that if at all there are any concerns of these stakeholders which I have mentioned, there will be an opportunity to address all these concerns, so that this bill, if it passed as a law in the parliament, will become a consensus based bill, because consensus means acceptability from all the stakeholders like farmers, state governments, union government will be there. Then it will be very easy transition for the enforcement of this bill. Now if you look at the present scenario, most of the stakeholders are opposing this bill, right? However, this kind of consensus building, consultative mechanism, this is a time consuming process, but it is a time proven process. It is time and again it is proved. So in this process, the parliamentary committees also plays very vital role, says the article. So what are parliamentary committees? Like standing committees or ad hoc committees, which plays very crucial role at different times. So the GST bill can be taken as a best example how a bill should be passed through broad consultation and deliberation. Now let's look at the GST. GST is basically a subsuming or merging of central government taxes and state government taxes. It means the state government has to sacrifice its tax levying powers, isn't it? So for that to happen, it needs constitutional amendment, number one. Number two, ratification of at least half number of the states is necessary. Okay, and also for this GST to get support across party lines, irrespective of ruling party or opposition party, all parties should also support this bill for smooth passing of this bill in both the houses of the parliament. And as well as state governments support is also mandatory, because in fact the implementation of GST is equally lied with respect to state governments. Apart from central governments, state governments are also equally responsible for implementing. So in this case, the support of all the stakeholders like all political parties and state governments is imperative. Okay, let's look at the GST journey. In 2007, the Empowered Group of State Finance Ministers group has been formed, and in fact the chairperson for this group is a finance minister from opposition party government only, right? Very interesting. And it has proposed some new provisions like GST council, GST dispute appellate authority, etc. And these things were discussed, deliberated. Finally the bill was introduced in the parliament in 2011, and later on this bill was referred to the standing committee, wherein standing committee has taken the opinion from all concerned stakeholders, and several amendments were proposed. Interestingly, these amendments were accepted, and freshly again a new bill was introduced in 2015. And this new bill, as soon as it was introduced, again it is passed in the Lok Sabha this time. Later on it was sent to the Rajya Sabha. In Rajya Sabha again this bill was referred to the select committee, and here the amendments were again proposed by the select committee based on the recommendations it got from different stakeholders. Here in this context I would like to tell you one thing. The difference between standing committee and the select committee is, while standing committee is a permanent body, the select committee is an ad hoc body. Okay, ad hoc means that body, that committee which is conducted on time to time basis, whereas the standing committee being a permanent one, it exists permanently. Okay, finally the amendments proposed by the select committee were also accepted, and then the bill deemed to be passed. Thereby it became a GST law which was implemented in 2017. So through this example the author wants to explain that any bill which involves different stakeholders like state governments, different political parties, that bill, before it is passed in the parliament, it should be under broad consultation. So for that broader consultation, parliament is the best suitable platform which acts as a deliberative or body. That's what the author wants to make his point. That's it regarding this topic.